back to Keeping It Real with Janine, a podcast to assist you in living an authentic, healthy life. I'm Janine Strong, and every 2 weeks, I endeavor to have an informative, inspiring conversation with an ordinary person who's leading an extraordinary life. My guest today is Luke Reynolds. He's an assistant professor of education at Endicott College in Massachusetts. Luke's most recent book, Even More Fantastic Failures, True Stories of People Who Changed the World by Falling Down First. It follows up with his popular first installment of Fantastic Failures, this time with even more flops. This should be a lot of fun. Even More Fantastic Failures explores the lives of admirable and courageous people, many of who you know of. You'll recognize their names. People who have struggled, failed, and been rejected, but nonetheless, they found ways to keep pushing forward to make themselves and their world better and more just. Luke Reynolds is a passionate believer in the power of stories to transform lives, especially stories that help us understand that we all fail and flounder sometimes. And you know what? It's okay. So let's start with, as my listeners know, I always like to start with a little bit of background and story about how you came to be doing what you're doing.
Okay, great. Thanks, Janine. So a lot of the people who have really had a profound influence on me as a writer and as preparing to be a teacher have been teachers I've had and people I've worked with over the years and mentors to me. One of the most important of those is Mr. Looney. He was an amazing teacher I had in 5th grade. His real name was Mr. Looney, Mr. Robert Looney, and his persona, his appearance, and his way of being in the classroom really personified every bit of that name. He that 5th grade year, he just filled us with just this zany, delightful view of life and literature. He would read poetry by Robert Frost to us. He would encourage us to write and read widely. And one of the best things he ever did for us was he gave us an incredible empowerment to write what we truly believed in and what we truly cared about, not what we were expected to do for the grade level and according to the textbook.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, that sounds important in encouraging people to want to write.
Yeah, it really is. And I think a lot of what we sometimes struggle with, particularly at that age, sort of the 4th, 5th, 6th, and even into middle school, when we work with kids, sometimes we try to convince them to write what we want to hear instead of writing what they need to write to be able to grow and process what they're experiencing, which a lot of times is, fear and worry and fantasy and adventure and potentially romance and all these things, sort of that 4th grade through 8th grade group is really learning and struggling through. And if we can't process it in our writing, we never sort of figure some of that out. And so Mr. Looney really encouraged us to chase after that and to try to think through writing what we needed to write and not to constantly be held up on spelling. And if we're, following the correct structure of a story, his aim was for us to write, write, write. And I think, Janine, it was that year that I thought to myself, writing is just magical. It's amazing. It's a way to create stories and ideas and share emotions with people and be authentic. And so Mr. Looney was really that driving force. And way back in 5th grade, I remember thinking, I want to be a writer and a teacher. And it kind of has stayed. And I've had other people like John Robinson, another teacher I was fortunate to work with later, who really encouraged that drive. And I'm just grateful to them and many others who cared about me and nurtured that passion.
Wow, you were really lucky to have a teacher like that. He sounds very special.
He was. And in fact, we still keep in touch on email now. Once in a while, we'll send an email back and forth. And he's just one of the
Ah,
most humble, kind people I've ever met.
Oh, that's cool. That's really cool.
Mhm.
So, then what did you, since you're a professor, you went to college, what did you major in, or what did you choose to focus on?
Well, I majored in English with a minor in secondary education,
Hmm.
but not without a lot of doubt, and I think probably is something many of us can relate to, where, we think, I just remember thinking, I want to teach high school English and this is going to be great. And then so many times along the path, I just remember feeling like, I don't know, like, can I do this? Am I any good at this?
Hmm.
I'll never forget once I finally finished college, started teaching my first year, and I just felt like I was a terrible teacher. I could not, manage the class, and I couldn't. I'll never forget. I think the tableau, the image that I hold in my head of that first year is, I had this one senior class, and I just wanted them to, I wanted to do what Mr. Looney did for me. I wanted
Mm.
them to really be interested in writing and reading. And this one student in the front, she just, I'd start my lesson and she'd open up her math book and start her math homework. And and I remember telling myself, I am not going to tell her to put it away. I'm going to try to make English so interesting that she'll just finally, put it away. Well, she never did, that. So I guess what I mean is that first year was a real learning curve. I
Wow.
had a lot of failure. I struggled. I wanted to quit. I had images of living a monastic life by myself and never seeing other human beings. And and
Wow.
it was only
Hmm.
thanks to my future wife. She was the one who encouraged me to give it a second year, and
Ah.
and that's where I really started to learn the craft more.
Oh, cool. Cool. So it wasn't, how do I want to say it? It wasn't an innate gift.
Mm,
You really had to work at it.
yes, yes, I really did, and that's one of the cool things and a lot of the research I've done, and what I like studying and writing about is and so often in the monolithic ideas and images we get about people who are doing beautiful things, it's always portrayed, or it's often portrayed to us as viewers and readers and listeners, that it's just kind of natural. It just sort of happens, and there's
Mm.
no sweat involved. And the more I peel back the layers of stories of people I admire, I find that there's often just a lot of failure and a lot of work, and it only seems natural because we don't find out about the success until the person has arrived.
Hmm.
And so it
Hmm.
seems natural, but I think along the way there's a lot of doubt and struggle in most anything worthwhile.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I found the book to be fascinating because you have so many people in it who we all know,
Hmm.
and that we assume, that they just kind of got to where they were because they're talented.
Hmm. Yeah, and that was my sort of conception for so long. I remember, even especially with writing, when rejection letters would pile up
Oh,
early
wow.
on, and even now, to be honest, I still get quite a few reject. One of the classes I teach is a creative writing class, and
Uh-huh.
I often tell the students, the other classes are education classes, but I tell the creative writing students, even though there's some books coming out, and I'm so grateful and I appreciate that, but every day I get probably 4 or 5 rejection letters every single day. So and I think that's something that's really powerful and important for my students to
Wow.
hear,
Hmm.
that it's normal. It's okay to be rejected, to fail. It's not there. And then there's no verdict in it. And maybe that's the most powerful truth I hope they hear, and I hope all of us hear, that sometimes we take the judgment of others as a verdict on who we
Mm,
are, and
good
I think
point.
that's a dangerous, dangerous mistake.
Hmm. So, what do you do to keep going? I mean, 4 to 5 rejection letters a day, that could, really cause someone to give up.
I think there definitely, and again, when I think, before I think before I sort of started to see, oh, this is normal, I thought, I never forget my first novel that was ever published. It was called The Looney Experiment. And I remember it gotten up to, based in part on Mr. Looney, who we
Hmm.
talked about. But I think we got to maybe 24, 25 rejections. And I thought, well, this is definitely this novel is unpublishable. It's not good. And I'd written a number of other novels before that never got published. But finally, it was the 26th or 27th publisher that bought it and wanted to publish it. And that was a great, in the moment and at the time I was deeply frustrated about it, but looking back, I'm deeply grateful because I think that long journey showed me, sometimes it takes 26, 27, 30, 40 publishers to reject something before you find the one. And I think it taught me the reality to stay with something if you really deeply believe in it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I
Mm,
mean, also while you're talking, I'm thinking, wow, how do, okay, so 25 people rejected you and one
mm,
person decided to pick you up. And I'm thinking, wow, what was different about that
mm,
one person? What did
mm,
they see that all those other people didn't? I think that's
mm.
fascinating.
Yeah, that's a great question, Janine, and I think there's so much power just in that line of thinking, and it's almost like like even things like the weather, right? Like sometimes they could say like, oh, one person loves it when it
Mm.
rains, and it
Mm-hmm.
just feels great to be outside in that fresh rain and invigorating. Someone else loves it when it's 95. Someone else loves it when it's 85 and sunny. And I think things like writing or art or dance, there's so much in life that's so subjective and
Mm-hmm.
is like what one person's ideal weather is another person's ideal story, and it's kind of finding this match. And that's very, for me, that's a very healthy way to think about the work we do. Is it's not necessarily always about, I think once you put in a lot of time to a craft that somebody believes in, it's the quality will be there, and then it's just about sticking with it to find that right match. What meshes well together,
Mm-hmm.
and friendships. Like we have four sons, and we try to encourage them to say, hey, you want to connect and be friends with people who help you feel like you can do things. They help
Right.
empower you, and you
Mm-hmm.
empower them, and it's a mutual lifting up. You're not tearing each other down. So again, it's finding that good, healthy match. And I think a lot of things, like you say, are like that in life.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point is, trying to surround yourself with people who are encouraging,
Mm,
and, want you to keep moving forward and help to encourage you to do that instead of encouraging you to give up.
mm, yeah. My wife made she one time when I was particularly discouraged about writing, probably 8 or 9 years ago, and it just been like a couple of years of just literally constant rejection. She made this little tea box for me, and in it she put all these quotes by about you know keeping on and writing and staying with it. But there was one really great quote that just what you're talking about is from Mark Twain, and it was keep away from small people. They'll always try to belittle your ambition.
Hmm.
Kind of this idea of if someone's small, they'll say, "Hey, you didn't do it, so you can't either." And I think you're right. We have to be careful of those kinds of matches when there's that toxicity to say, "Who do you think you are to, pursue ballet, to be a drummer, to be a writer, to be a soccer player, whatever the case may be?" And I
Hmm.
think um, and there are those people that try to tear down. And then there's a lot of people that do say, hey, I want to take a risk and try this. And you should try things you care about too.
Yeah, well, I think there really is something to the saying misery loves company.
Yes, 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 yes. I do too. I
Well,
do
I have
too.
I have to say your wife sounds very special.
You know what? If it weren't for her, I think I would have quit teaching and probably quit writing. She's a great encourager, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm sure you do.
Hopefully I do half as much of encouraging her as she does for me.
Wow. What's her name, by the way?
Jennifer
Jennifer.
Reynolds.
Great. Wow.
Yeah.
Jennifer is to be lauded because, I mean, sometimes that's just what it takes is somebody who's got
Mm,
your back, somebody who
yeah.
believes in you.
Mm, mm,
And that can be really important.
mm. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And that's, even in the some of the fantastic failures, that's a lot of what I found was these people who ended up accomplishing something really beautiful. They had, like you're saying, they had someone in their corner to say, keep going, it's okay. And they would be rejected or struggle and not make it, but then they'd look back to their corner and there's that one, just one set of eyes saying, looking at you sternly saying, yep, it's okay. I'm here. You got this. And I think you're right. We all need just at least one person like that.
Hmm. Hmm. What other ways, I think that's a really important point, Luke. What other ways can help people to switch over from letting failure stop them from moving forward and inspiring them to keep at it, besides having
Hmm.
someone in their corner? What are some of the other things that you feel are important or that helped you?
Yeah. I feel like one other huge key that's important is putting the failure in context. And
Hmm.
I think that's a tough thing to do, but it's something we can, the more we do it, it becomes more natural. And I think a good example is like we look at like say my third son who's 3 years old, when something say he's building a Lego tower and it falls,
Hmm.
right? Because he's three, he doesn't have a lot of experience. It's like, the Lego tower, no, it
My
seems
life
as
is
though
ruined.
my life is, this is it. I have spent, the past 19 minutes doing this and now nothing matters anymore, you know, and I think, but I think, I think the more we live and the more we see like, hey, those failures. So if we're 22 and we've never failed and we fail, we might feel like that Lego tower. And so I think the more context we get in our lives, the more context we can help our kids and students get to see, look, here's what life is like. Lego towers fall often, and and you might get a C, and that's okay, or you might not make it on the basketball team, and that's okay. So the
Hmm.
more we can help coach kids and the more we can self-talk for ourselves to say, okay, this seems really disturbing and tragic and sad that I failed, but then if we take a step back and say, but this is one moment of my life in the context of my whole life, what part of the song is this going to be, and so if we think also, music is a great way for me to think of context. You think of if every song just had all the really high notes, it would be deeply disturbing to listen to. And so it's
Right.
sometimes it is those low notes, those failures that help set up for the next sort of chorus that's going to come. And so putting it in context, I think, really helps. And then honesty, and this is why I think it's so important for us to be honest with each other about failures,
Hmm.
because I think kids, if they only hear successes from parents or teachers or others, they can really be primed into thinking like, oh, it's failing is really unusual and it means something's wrong with me. So the more we as adults talk about our failures, I think that also creates a context for kids to realize, hey, this is okay. I can bounce back from this.
Hmm. Hmm. So, I can relate to this because when I went to college, I really didn't know, it was kind of like what was expected. I didn't
Mm,
like have a real, passion to do anything. So I
mm,
think my first major was French.
mm,
And I don't know if I don't remember if I didn't like it or I didn't do that well. So I switched to Spanish. And then this is so embarrassing, but I'm being authentic here. I
mm.
learned how to play bridge.
Wow.
And
Mm,
I ended up, for some reason, I can't fathom why now, but I ended up spending a lot of time in the cafeteria playing bridge.
mm.
And I was not invited back to Drake University.
Wow. Mm, mm,
So I ended up at the University of Minnesota because my family was living in outside of Minneapolis. And I remember they have like a sort of a 2-year program. And then if you do well, you can go into the 4-year program. And I
mm,
remember the counselor telling me only 1 in 11 people will make it, who screwed
Wow.
up. And I was like, ha, I'm one of those one. I'm the
Wow.
one,
Wow.
kiddo. So,
Hmm.
but then,
Hmm.
so then I went into theater and modern
Mm-hmm.
dance. I was a fairly good, but I wasn't like great. And I noticed that, in the rumor mill, some of the like grad students in the theater department, the reason that they were making it was because of the casting couch.
Hmm.
And I thought, I'm not up for that.
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm really not.
Hmm.
And then, oh gosh, I don't know how many years later, it wasn't too much, maybe 3 years later. So I decided I went to the University of Massachusetts as a nursing student.
Wow. Hmm.
And that's where, that's where I ended up. But I mean, to me, having all of these experiences has really enriched my life,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
also given me such a broad background of knowledge,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know. And I just interviewed Paul O'Brien, and he was talking about how Saturn return cycles. And
Hmm.
he was saying that up till the age 30, that's the time where you're supposed to be experimenting, challenging
Hmm.
yourself, trying different things, failing, whatever, to find out what it is you really want.
Hmm.
What really inspires you. He says it's not really the best time to like make a choice and go for it unless you've always known what you wanted to do. But for most people, it's a really good time to experiment and try different things and not worry about
Yeah.
failing.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's so powerful because I think what you're describing, your journey and your guest, that sense of by doing that, we create a, a life. We create all these rich experiences that then we can share from that gives us wisdom, these different people we meet, different contexts we learn about, different skill sets, and all of the none of that's wasted. I think that's what
Right.
brings meaning to our lives. So that's beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what inspired you to write these books?
I think the key reason, or really the catalyst for the Fantastic Failure series was, I was a seventh grade teacher at the time, and I was teaching English, and I just noticed that every time I handed back an essay, if the students didn't get, a perfect score, there was this deep, sadness, like, oh, why did I get this grade? Or I would see students come in and, if they hadn't made a sports team or had essentially any mistake, or if they seemed like they weren't fitting into a certain social crowd, it was almost like any struggle or failure, they took it as a verdict on their lives. And I was
Mm.
so sad to see that. And so what I started doing, I just on a whim sort of started researching people that I knew they would know,
Mm-hmm.
interesting or famous people. And I just started looking for failures, problems, rejections, obstacles these folks faced. And then one a day, I would just, for the first 5 minutes of class, I would just share the story of that person.
Mm-hmm.
So, we would talk about Albert Einstein and his elementary school principal, direct quote, the principal saying, "This school would be a wonderful place if it weren't for Albert Einstein," and to look up at what he was able to accomplish, or Barack Obama, not being able to even get into the Democratic National Convention
Mm-hmm.
before 4 years later he was the keynote speaker. And so these really interesting moments that we just don't hear about.
Mm-hmm.
And I started sharing that, and my goal was I just wanted students to see that the people they admire and the people they know about and who are achieving great things certainly felt the same level of failure, confusion, rejection that they have felt. Like essentially, they're in this sacred club we call humanity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I love, Luke, how you structured each chapter. I think it's really cool because you begin with what I would call the ideal version of each person's road to success, and
Mm,
how we'd all like it to be. And then you
mm.
go, no, not at all, or whatever in big letters. And then you recount the reality of the failures and the hardships that actually occurred. And I think that's brilliant. How did you come up with that idea?
I think we were just looking for a way to make it really engaging and fun, and also to kind of tap into that sort of the myth of how we think of certain people. You know, that we think of people who have done beautiful things as, wow, this, like we talked about it earlier in our conversation. This must have just been a very natural, you know,
Mm-hmm.
this was talent. This was sort of they were this is who they are, and I wanted to kind of really juxtapose, this is how we sort of are tempted to think of them and make it a little funny and extreme, but this is who they really are, and it felt like a fun comparison to play with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It really is a fun read. And I mean, even, for somebody who's older like me, it's still a fun book to read because I
Mm,
assume that your audience is young adults or
mm,
teenagers.
yeah, that's the original intended audience,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of did see, I almost, you know, even to be honest, like the first Fantastic Bears, which I wrote now about 3 to 4 years ago.
Okay.
I'll go back and reread it, and just to try to stay motivated myself, you know. So I think I do hope that adults or people of all ages can find something to grab onto and to stay inspired.
Uh-huh. Well, I was really surprised at a lot of the stories of people that I know of, and
Mm,
I just thought, wow, I had no idea, that what they had to go through before they
mm,
they finally were recognized or, were able to really do what they wanted to do.
mm.
How did you find the background material?
It was this where it was kind of fun. The first Fantastic Bears I actually started researching while I was also finishing my PhD. So I was
Mm,
a lot of my coursework was in how to do research and
hmm.
how to, you know, really go deep and find primary sources. And so I thought, okay, I'm writing this very academic um, dissertation for my PhD, but I thought, what if I use some of these research things I'm learning, skills I'm learning, and apply it to you know this book I'm writing for fun that I just really care about. And so I just looked at a lot of primary sources, especially for the older features who are, you know, older, and then even for the very modern ones, I tried to find a lot of interviews, direct quotes, things like that, and it just felt like a little bit of a treasure hunt, you know. And it got to the point where I knew I could, you know, start searching anyone, and that sooner or later I'd uncover some rejection and failure along the way. So that was a very cool thing to pursue. And then also, I have to just a huge shout out to the publishers, my editor, you know, Lindsay and Emelisa, the two editors I worked with on
Hmm.
both of these books, and they were just marvelous. They would find people as well as, and so it'd be a flurry of
Oh,
emails like, hey Luke, I just saw this cool story, what do you think about this person? And so they would recommend people, and then I'd dive in and look at them, or they'd find articles or things they you know, the clip they had seen. And so it was very much an organic nature,
uh-huh.
plus a lot of support and help from my two editors at Beyond Words and Simon and Schuster. And so that was kind of how it came together, and it was definitely a team effort.
Uh-huh. And it sounds like fun. I mean, I love, when I'm interested in something, I love to dive deep in research. I
Mm,
find that fun.
mm,
Some people
mm.
call that nerdy, but I don't know. Maybe it is. I don't care, but it's a
And
lot of fun. I like learning. I
yeah,
like I like understanding how
mm,
people and things work.
mm, yeah. I think it's beautiful. I think I kind of feel like, you know, when you look at very young kids, it's such a natural thing. We want to learn, we want to know, we want to find things out. And I think as we go, it's almost sort of bred out of us. Like, no, don't have questions about all this. Just focus on essentially what's on the test, or what do you need to sort
Mm.
of graduate or take the next step. But like
Hmm.
you, I think that's beautiful. That curiosity is such a heartbeat for us. It keeps us interested in what's going on around us, and not just because it's a paycheck or a grade.
Hmm. Hmm. So, do you have some of, maybe I would imagine some of your favorite stories that you might like to share of people that probably the listeners would know and would be surprised to hear?
Definitely. Yeah, yeah, you bet. So, and it's kind of a funny thing because I feel like every time I would, research someone, I'd say, "Oh, this is my favorite. This is the
Yep,
best
I
one.
know
I
what you're
love
saying.
this
Yep.
story." But there's so many I really like. I mean, I think probably one of my favorites is the Barack Obama stories, the first
Hmm.
one I wrote for this volume. And it was just to me that was so moving because he is definitely for me is someone I really admire. I just loved finding out. It was actually on a podcast. I think it was the Axe Files podcast,
Mm-hmm. Hmm.
where Obama was talking with David Axelrod, his previous campaign manager, and in it they go through this story of Barack Obama being unable to even have enough on his credit card to rent a car in
Hmm.
LA. He had gone there because he had just been defeated in a state senate race and or congressional seat race, excuse me. And now he's at this national convention trying to get remotivated to believe in politics and that he has what it takes to be a political leader. And they literally will not let him onto the floor of the convention hall. They say your pass is not high enough. And so he has this great moment in the interview where Obama describes being in these hallways and the doors are closed. He can't get in, and so he's watching the speeches on the TV. And for me, that was just such a poignant image of someone who had, become a president and just an incredible world leader, win the Nobel Peace Prize, all these great things. And yet here he is. I like thinking of him in that moment where he's in the hallway watching a convention on TV because they say, no, you don't have the street cred. You can't get in. You don't have what it takes. And I think it's one that readers can identify with, particularly my middle school students, but maybe all of us being told, no, you don't have what it takes. And we sort of feel like the doors are closed on us at points in our lives. Another one I really liked, just because it was so unusual, was the story of a guy named, and he's not necessarily a famous person that we might know, like some of the other stories like
Hmm.
Beyonce and,
Hmm.
John Cena, Lin-Manuel Miranda. But the story of Alan Neyman is so cool to me. So he was this guy who worked as a social worker and, he worked with kids. He essentially found children homes, found places for them to be safe if they, for some reason, were unsafe or abused
Okay.
and
Hmm.
his job as a social worker. And yet, unbeknownst to anyone, he was a multimillionaire. He had worked in business, but he spent his whole life most of his life working as a social worker. Didn't spend any money on himself. He now famously, duct taped his shoes when they ripped, and then when he died, he gave his entire millions to charity. And it was a cool moment because to people who saw him, he might seem like a failure. Like, hey,
Hmm. Hmm.
you're walking around with duct tape shoes. You're wearing old clothes. You just don't have. We would look at someone who has the mansion and all of these nice fancy things as a success.
Hmm.
So Alan
Hmm.
Neyman seemed like a failure, and then when he died, he actually, he was this amazing success, and the charities who he gave to were just, enamored with his incredible generosity.
Hmm. Hmm.
So those are two of my favorites. Though I'll share one other one I love. Lin-Manuel Miranda, who wrote the incredible Broadway hits, and
Hmm.
I love this moment where he describes how it took him a whole day to write 2 lines. And that's just a little, we would think of that as a failure for a writer.
Wow. I mean, if you really think of that, a whole day to write, everybody take a moment and
Yeah.
and and grok
Mm,
writing 2 lines. That's all you get done in an entire day.
mm,
you know.
mm. Yeah. And he says like, hey, this is the journey. Writing isn't easy for me. It's hard. And I played around with those lines all day and I struggled. But at the end of the day, I got 2 lines, so probably what, 30 words, 40
Wow.
words.
Hmm.
But that's a day's work. And that's cool. It redefines success, I think.
Hmm. Hmm. Because it would be very easy to see that as a failure.
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm.
Well, the what's the guy's name? Alan. Uh,
Alan Neyman. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point. I'd like to drill down on that a little bit because we tend to look at how a person presents themselves, whether
Mm,
it's how they look, how they act, what they have, and we make judgments. We all do that. We immediately make judgments, and I think that's such a good reference for why not to do that or try to catch ourselves, because you just don't know what's on the inside. You don't really know what a person is about by what you see on the outside.
mm, yeah. And I think you're right. I think in that way, it sometimes feels like social media has become, just a massive high school for the world.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
you say, we can look at these superficial, this outside sense of who people are and say, oh, this is what it looks like to be successful and to have everything together. And I think the deeper story is often far more complex and often far more meaningful. And I think you're right. Alan Neyman's story just really illustrates that it's someone who seems to look like a failure to others is actually thriving, is doing good work in the world, and is also they have these millions waiting to be given away to charity. That was his sort of grand plan that he
Mm-hmm.
told no one about. And I think there's a lot of us like that, the whether we want to call ourselves wallflowers or what, but if we're people there's a lot of people in this world doing really neat, beautiful things, but they're not in front of a microphone and
Mm-hmm.
maybe they're not seen, but
Right.
they matter. Their lives matter, and it's important.
Right. And I think, these days, and especially now, a lot of people are doing their schoolwork online.
Mm,
Um, and everybody's online, and with all this social media. And, it's not that hard to present yourself
hmm.
as having it all together for a while, right?
Right.
For
That's
while
right.
you're online or while you're on Facebook, or,
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
doing that video. But
Hmm.
so many people who are able to pull that off,
Mm,
and I hear this a lot from lots of different people, in their everyday lives. They're feeling anxious, they might be feeling depressed, they might be feeling
mm,
like a failure. um,
hmm.
but especially for younger people, all they see are these people who've got it together, and they're successful, and they're happy, and they're upbeat. And why aren't I like that?
Yeah.
And I think
Yep.
that's dangerous.
I do too. I think it's very dangerous, and I think it creates you're right, this false narrative that, hey, this is how life should be, and this is like these other people seem to have it, so what's wrong with me? And I think that creates a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear, a lot of depression. Um, and in reality, it's we I think, and one thing I continually stress to my students is we all struggle, even no matter how we might appear online or like you say in these moments, we all struggle. And the more honest we can be about that, the better. And I
Hmm.
think that's how real joy comes out of being honest about our struggle,
Right.
rather than pretending it doesn't exist.
Right. And it's different for all of us. Like, for some people, it
Hmm.
may be relationships. For
Mm,
for other
yeah.
people, we all have our area, our weak links. That we all have our areas where we've got lots to learn, and we have
Mm,
lots of growing to do. But I don't think there isn't anyone who doesn't have an area of their life where it's a challenge.
hmm. Yep, I
Even
agree.
a lot of the people who are these big authors and speakers, and
Yeah.
doing seminars and retreats and stuff. They all have
Mm,
their dark side. They all have their areas. Usually it's relationships.
mm,
But they all have their areas where they're kind of stuck, and
mm,
they're having trouble. They're having
mm,
difficulty. But
yeah.
when you see them up there on the stage, you wouldn't know it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's a profound point. I think you're right. It's a lot easier to give a speech about something than to do it. And I think
Hmm.
my wife and I will often joke to the theme you're driving here. We will joke about, we have four boys and we'll say, you read these parenting books and you can watch a parenting video, And then it dawned on us, and this is the key aha moment that we had that really just helped us relax is,
Uh,
we with our first son, I was a stay-at-home dad when he was young, and I was just watching all these, videos and reading all these books. And what was so interesting was it tended to be white men, often doctors or other, with a lot of degrees, giving all this advice. And then my wife and I sat down one night and we're like, wait a minute, if this white guy is giving all this advice about how to be this amazing parent and what kids need, but he's traveling all year and he's doing these very expensive talks and writing a ton of books, he's probably actually not parenting his own kids. And then I just felt a total release of judgment because I realized it's a lot easier to talk it than to do it.
absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
anyway,
Yeah, no, I mean,
yeah.
I'm there. I mean, as a, I've also, I mean, I've got training in a lot of things, but also as a life coach and, in
Mm,
helping people. And I'm like, you know, living with two teenage boys who are struggling right now,
mm, mm,
and it's a lot different coaching someone who has teenage
mm.
boys that are struggling, but to live with it 24/7 is pretty tough.
Mm.
It's
Yeah,
pretty,
yeah, yeah. No, I hear you. Yeah.
and you've
Mm.
got four. My heart goes, my heart goes
But
out to you. It's not easy. It's
no,
not
it
easy,
isn't. It's
and
it's yeah,
a lot of it is you learn
yeah,
as you go, and you make
yeah,
mistakes, and
yeah.
you hope you're not messing them up.
Yes, yeah. And you hope that somewhere along the way they're picking up good things, and that is, the truth is, and this is why I feel like these, more than anything I've written, these books on failure are dear to my heart because I think the truth is, a story, we can tell a story and, we can choose to tell it a certain way and have a certain ending. But the reality is in life it's very messy, it's very complicated, it's very confusing. There's lots of rejection and failure and it goes on longer than we'd like and we can't solve it. And even, I will, and my wife and I will continue to joke, I have a PhD in education. I've done a ton of research on kids and learning and there are so many times where I'm trying to teach my kids to do something and it's not working. I'm failing, and we try very hard to keep each other honest about that and to say, the day that say like, oh, I know all about this, and that's the day that I think my words have no meaning anymore because I fail constantly as a dad and a teacher, and I think I've gotten to the point now where I want my kids to see that because I want them to say, yeah, you're never going to get it all right, but if you choose to accept that, you'll be a lot happier, and hopefully you'll have people to walk through that confusion with.
hmm hmm and really, at the end of the day, the point is to learn from it all, right? Because if we don't learn, then we kind of keep repeating over and over, those failures.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
if you can stop and take stock and learn from that failure and then move on, to
mm,
that's the point. Because I do think we learn more from our failures than our successes.
yeah. I think you're right. Yeah. And those failures, like, in the story when you talked about Drake, Drake and
God.
leaving, but those moments, those, like you said, those failures or those, the times where I remember failing classes, having to repeat, having to do different things, they can send us in different directions that we might not have taken had we
Exactly.
succeeded.
Exactly. Yeah, sometimes it's about the synchronicity and the timing of things that,
Mm,
you know, we wouldn't be where we are today if we hadn't had those experiences that led us in
mm,
certain directions.
yeah, I agree. Yeah. And I think that is what's beautiful. The way, when we're in it, it always feels like this is not going the way it should. But then when I think, take that sort of bird's eye view and scan back, it does start to have this really beautiful journey to it that we learn and we take what we learned and bring it to our next challenge.
hmm
And you're right. I think failure can teach us a lot.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been really fun, Luke. You're
Mm.
you're a great guest. This is great. Now, what are some of your other books, just so people know what some of the other things you've written are?
Sure. Well, yeah, my first book was the novel The Looney Experiment, and that was a lot of fun, a middle grade novel.
Okay.
I also love writing books for teachers. So I've one called Call to Creativity,
Okay.
and then an anthology called Burned In. And
What's that?
a lot of these Burned In is based on this one statistic I heard during my some of my research on education, which was that about 50% of teachers quit within their first 3 years.
Oh,
And
wow.
so Burned In was an anthology, actually. I asked a lot of education writers I admire to help and contribute. And it's just thinking about how do we stay burned in as teachers, and if how are half of all teachers quitting within the
Hmm.
first 3 years. And so a lot of the books come out of just questions, problems, confusions I have.
Hmm.
Um, and then I love writing picture books. So one of my favorite picture books is If My Love Were a Fire Truck, a Daddy's Love Song.
Oh, who does the pictures?
It's Jeff Mack. He's
Ah,
a
okay.
really cool artist, and he really brought it to life nicely.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Okay. Also be careful talking with your hands.
Yeah, sorry. Oh, such a bad habit.
No, we all do it. Some just more than others. Um,
I do it a lot. I'm Italian, so
of course. Okay. Any other books?
yeah. And then there's another one called Bedtime Blast-Off, which is about a father and a son who the father is trying to get the son to bed, but the son is very, very good at concocting new imaginary tableaus to act out with his dad and prolong bedtime. So that was quite fun. And then I had the chance to work on a really cool series with Rody Montijo called The Gamazing Gum Girl, which is it's a beautiful story about a Latina girl who can every time she chews gum, she transforms into this superhero who can stretch and do all this cool stuff
Oh, what
and use
fun.
gum as her superpower. So those
Uh-huh.
are some fun ones to work on too.
Wow. Well, you've been quite prolific, I must say. I'm glad I asked you so people can see what some of the other books you've written are, and might want to get them for their kids or and to read. It sounds like some of them would be good bedtime stories.
The funny thing is, I think it's astronomically more rejection than the books that have come out, but I'm grateful to see the ones that have come out.
Well, and I'm glad you did. I'm glad that you
Hmm.
kept going because,
Hmm.
from what I've read, I've only read the one, but I thought it was great fun and very informative.
Well, thanks.
Yeah. So, how can people? I assume your books are all on Amazon or Barnes and Noble or all that. Is that where people would get your books?
Yeah, that's probably the best way to find them. There are independent bookstores um, that have them on stock too, but probably Amazon and Barnes and Noble are the most national, widespread ways to grab them.
Hmm.
Yeah,
And I assume you have a website.
I do. Yes, it's LukeWReynolds.com.
Okay. And Reynolds is Reynolds.
Yes.
Okay. If somebody wanted to connect with you, what would be the best way?
Oh, definitely. Well, I love interacting with readers or just
Ah,
people who had to share an idea. And anyone can feel free to shoot me an email at lwreynolds@gmail.com. And I always write back.
oh, wow. Okay. So LW Reynolds, and I'll put that on the website too at gmail.com. Okay,
Hmm.
great. Well, is there anything else that you'd like to share before we wrap up that maybe we haven't covered?
No, just to reiterate the driving force of our conversation, which was so fun, which is if you fail, you're not alone and it's normal.
Hmm. And find someone to be in your corner, someone who
Mm,
can be your cheerleader, someone who can help you get through the tough time.
yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. You're here. And don't be afraid to ask for it
yeah.
sometimes.
Good point.
I need a little encouragement. My wife and I have an agreement that we could we can ask each other to say, I think I just need a compliment or some encouragement right now because I'm struggling, So
Yeah, I think that's important. to have that agreement that you can always ask for help with someone, and they can always ask for help from you.
Yeah.
Because truly, a good friend, should be someone who is there for you when you need it. It's both ways. Yeah. Great. Well, thank you. This has really been fun. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you, Janine. I really enjoyed it as well.
Yeah, it was great fun. Great. Well, you take care, and I look forward to looking at some of your other books too.
Great. Thank you. And you too, Brian. I really appreciate all your interest and your generosity.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Luke Reynolds, for reminding us all that failure is to be embraced and used to help us build resilience, and it need not stop us from success. The podcast website is realjanine.com, and as always, Janine is Janean. Go to your favorite podcast provider to subscribe to Keeping It Real with Janine, and if you're a fan of YouTube, there are video slideshows of all my conversations. Just search Keeping It Real with Janine. Do you know someone who would enjoy my conversation with Luke Reynolds? I'm pretty sure you do, so if you'd like to help out, we'd really appreciate it, and share with those you love and care about. Thanks for listening. Take care, and as always, be well.